Self-improvement is the most elegant lie ever sold to you. Not because it's wrong, because it's not enough. It has never been enough. And somewhere beneath the highlight reels and morning routines and color-coded journals, you have always known this. You read the books, you woke up early, you downloaded the apps, tracked the habits, counted the calories, scheduled the deep work blocks. You listened to the podcasts while running, while eating, while driving to a job that never quite felt like yours. You practiced atomic habits. You chased 1% better every day. You optimized. You systematized. You built the spreadsheet of your own becoming. And you are still standing in the same room, by scarcity, by 1,000 small moments of being taught that you are not quite enough, not quite worthy, not quite permitted to demand more from this life. That identity cannot be improved. It must be killed. This is not metaphor. This is surgery. Identity suicide, the total demolition of who you have been, is not a dramatic option among many. It is the only option. It is inevitable. There is no negotiation, no gentler version, no path that bypasses the burial. The architects of history did not refine their old selves. They buried them. They stood in silence, looked at the frightened, permission-seeking, scarcity-infected version of themselves, and decreed its end. You did not arrive here looking for another morning routine. You arrived because the deepest part of you, the part that has been buried longest, silenced hardest, waiting with ancient patience, already knows. It is time to burn. There is an exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. You know exactly what it feels like. 3 a.m., eyes open, ceiling staring back. No crisis, no emergency, just a low, persistent hum of wrongness that you cannot locate and cannot name. The kind of feeling that follows you into the morning, sits with you through meetings, hides behind the smile you hold exactly 1 second longer than you mean to. That is not anxiety. That is a self that does not fit the life it is trapped inside. Carl Jung called the mask you built the persona, not a lie exactly, a survival mechanism, assembled in childhood, refined through years of learning what the world rewards and what it punishes. Be agreeable, be manageable, be useful, be small enough not to threaten the people whose approval once felt like oxygen. The persona is not evil, it is architecture, the architecture of accommodation. The catastrophe is not that you built it. The catastrophe is that somewhere along the way, you stopped wearing the mask and became it. And now you cannot tell the difference between who you performed yourself to be and who is actually operating this life. Jung named what lives beneath the shadow, not a monster. The shadow is everything that was exiled because it was too large for the rooms you grew up in. Every impulse toward power that was labeled arrogance. Every desire for more that was called greed. Every refusal to shrink that was punished into silence. The shadow is not the worst of you. It is often the most sovereign of you, buried alive by environments that could not contain it. There is a specific kind of person who reads every book and changes nothing, not because they are lazy, not because they lack intelligence, because they are running an operating system so old, so deeply embedded, that no new application installed on top of it can override the base code. The books become information. The information never becomes transformation. And the gap between knowing and being, that gap is where most people spend their entire lives. That gap has a name, scarcity identity. It is not a mindset. It is not a habit. It is a skeleton. It is the bone structure beneath every decision, every hesitation, every moment you almost stepped forward and then didn't. It was not chosen. It was installed by a childhood that taught you resources were limited, love was conditional, safety was earned through smallness, and wanting too much was the fastest way to lose what little you had. The scarcity skeleton does not announce itself. It operates through disguise. It looks like humility when it is actually self-erasure. It looks like patience when it is actually fear of the attempt. It looks like being realistic when it is actually the internalized voice of every person who ever told you to lower the ceiling on your own ambition. Watch how it moves in daily life. The business idea you researched for 2 years and never launched. The conversation you rehearsed 100 times and never had. The version of yourself you can visualize with perfect clarity. The posture, the voice, the presence, the authority that you have never once permitted yourself to fully inhabit. Not because you cannot, Because the scarcity skeleton contracts the moment expansion becomes real. Because somewhere in the wiring, more feels dangerous. Visibility feels dangerous. Power feels dangerous. This is not weakness. This is programming, and programming can be demolished. Neville Goddard understood something that most psychologists refuse to admit. The outer life is always a precise projection of the inner state. Not approximately, not loosely correlated, precisely. The circumstances arranging themselves around a person are not random. They are the physical crystallization of an assumed identity. What a person assumes themselves to be, not what they wish, not what they aspire to, but what they have accepted as true about themselves in the wordless pre-verbal depths. That assumption becomes the blueprint the world builds around them. The scarcity skeleton is not a flaw in character, it is an assumption. A deeply buried, long accepted, silently governing assumption about what is permitted, what is possible, what a person of your particular history is allowed to become. Assumptions can be killed, old states can be died to. Goddard called it exactly that, dying to the old state, not evolving from it, not healing it, not making peace with it, dying to it. The way a seed ceases to exist as a seed the moment it becomes a tree. There is no negotiation between the seed and the tree. There is only the death of one and the inevitable emergence of the other. The self-improvement industry sells you seed polish, seed optimization, seed habit stacking. What is required is the death of the seed entirely. You have been polishing long enough. History does not remember the men who improved themselves gradually. It remembers the men who broke themselves open and rebuilt from the wreckage. It remembers the ones who looked at the identity handed to them by circumstance, by poverty, by obscurity, by every voice that said this is as far as your kind goes, and chose, with cold sovereign authority, to decree a different reality into existence. Andrew Carnegie arrived in America with nothing but a name and a hunger that scarcity could not extinguish. He did not optimize his poverty. He did not build 1% better habits around his limitations. He made a decision at the level of identity, a total, irreversible commitment to a self that did not yet exist in physical form, and then held that assumption with such absolute conviction that the world had no choice but to rearrange itself accordingly. The steel empire was not built first. The identity of the man who would build it was forged first. The empire was merely the inevitable consequence. John D. Rockefeller operated by the same law, the same ancient, invisible, absolute law. He did not come from power. He came from chaos, an absent father, a family of instability, a beginning that offered no logical reason for what followed. But Rockefeller understood something at a bone-deep level that most men never grasp. The outer world is not the cause. It is the effect. The cause is always internal. The cause is always the identity assumed in the silence before action. He did not chase success. He embodied the sovereign first, in posture, in decision, in the quality of his silence. And success followed the way a shadow follows a body. Napoleon Hill spent 20 years studying these men, not their tactics, their psychology, the invisible architecture of the minds that built visible empires. And what he found, distilled beneath all the strategy and all the method, was a single terrifying principle. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. Not whatever the mind can plan, not whatever the mind can optimize. Whatever it can believe, at the level of assumed identity, not intellectual aspiration. This is the line that separates the architects from the renovators. The renovator believes in the goal, while still fundamentally assuming the old identity. The architect assumes the new identity first, completely, non-negotiably, without waiting for external evidence, and watches as reality crystallizes around the assumption like ice forming around a point of cold. Hill called it the mastermind. Jung called it individuation. Goddard called it dying to the old state and living from the new. The language is different. The law is identical. The law does not care about your history. It does not factor in your childhood, your failures, your current bank balance, your family's ceiling. The law operates on one variable and one variable only, what you have accepted as true about yourself in the deepest, most wordless chamber of your identity. Change the assumption, the world follows. Neville Goddard called it dying to the old state. He was not speaking in poetry. He was describing a precise psychological operation. The old state is not just a collection of habits or beliefs. It is a felt sense of self, a specific frequency of being that generates specific assumptions, specific reflexes, specific invisible permissions and prohibitions around what is possible. As long as that frequency is running, no new identity can fully install. The signal is already occupied. The old state will reassert itself through self-sabotage, through unconscious retreat, through the thousand subtle ways a person engineers their own return to the familiar, even when the familiar is a cage. Dying to the old state means withdrawing the life force from that frequency entirely, not suppressing it, not managing it, not negotiating with it, withdrawing, the way a tree withdraws energy from a dying branch, not with grief, not with ceremony, simply because the energy is needed elsewhere. The branch is not mourned, the tree does not apologize for its own growth. Marcus Aurelius understood this through a different vocabulary. The Stoics called it amor fati, the total acceptance, even the love, of what is necessary. And what is necessary for the sovereign is the complete dissolution of every attachment to the identity that kept him small. Not the circumstances, not the relationships, not the external world, the attachment to a version of the self that was assembled for survival in an environment that no longer exists and no longer deserves authority over the present. The prison is not the past. The prison is the loyalty to a self that the past created. Ford understood this when he stood in a factory that everyone told him was impossible and decided, with the calm authority of a man who had already died to doubt, that it would be built. The men around him saw the obstacles. Ford saw only the decree. The decree was not arrogance, it was the natural expression of an identity so completely assumed that contradiction felt irrelevant. The way a king does not argue with the weather. He simply commands the fortress to be built regardless. This is the quality the self-improvement industry cannot manufacture and cannot sell. It cannot be acquired through habit stacking. It cannot be grown incrementally. It is not the result of discipline. It is the result of a death, the specific, surgical, non-negotiable death of the self that required permission, that waited for evidence, that needed the external world to validate the internal assumption before daring to act. The sovereign does not wait for permission. The sovereign issues the decree and watches permission become irrelevant. That death is not something that happens to you. It is something you choose, right now, in this moment, with nothing changed in the external world except the single thing that changes everything. The identity you are willing to assume. Stop waiting to feel ready. Readiness is a myth, the old identity invented to postpone its own execution. The man who built the empire did not feel ready. The woman who commanded the room did not feel ready. Readiness is the emotional state of the renovator, the one who needs conditions to be favorable, evidence to be sufficient, fear to be absent before taking the throne. The architect does not wait for readiness. The architect assumes the identity first and allows the feelings to follow the assumption like water follows gravity. This is the shift. This is the exact point where the two lives diverge. On one side, the renovator, consuming content, accumulating knowledge, waiting for the moment when the inner feeling finally matches the outer ambition, building the case for their own becoming, asking the world for permission to be more, shrinking the vision to fit the comfort zone, explaining to themselves with great sophistication and great patience exactly why now is not quite the right time. On the other side, the architect, who understands that the feeling of sovereignty does not precede the assumption of sovereignty, it follows it, who understands that the identity is not discovered, it is constructed, deliberately, with the cold precision of a man who has looked at the blueprint and decided without negotiation that this is the structure that will be built. You are not finding yourself. There is nothing to find. The self is not buried treasure waiting to be excavated. The self is raw material waiting to be forged. Forged, not found. There is a universe of difference between those two words. The person who searches for themselves remains permanently in the search. The search becomes the identity. The journey becomes the destination. And 10 years pass in the comfortable limbo of becoming, never quite arriving, never quite committing to the full death of the old and the full installation of the new. Always one more book away. Always one more breakthrough session away. Always almost. Almost is the most expensive word in the human vocabulary. The architect does not search. The architect draws the blueprint. commits to the structure, breaks ground on the foundation of the new identity with the same calm authority that Carnegie broke ground on the first mill. Not because every obstacle had been cleared, but because the identity of the man who would clear them had already been fully assumed. The architect has arrived, not tomorrow, not after the next milestone. Now, in this posture, in this breath, in this moment of choosing the assumption over the evidence, the decree over the doubt, the blueprint over the rubble of the old identity, the construction has begun. There is a dimension to this that goes deeper than personal ambition. Most people frame identity transformation as a private project, a self-improvement endeavor with better branding, a solo mission to become a higher functioning individual. And that framing, while not wrong, is catastrophically small. Because the identity you carry is not only yours, it never was. Ancient transmissions from people who were themselves transmitting what they received. Jung called this the ancestral shadow. The psychological inheritance that passes through generations not through genetics, but through pattern, through the way a father holds tension in his body, the way a mother's voice changes around money, the way entire families organize themselves around unspoken wounds that no one has ever named and therefore no one has ever healed. You are not only living your life, you are living the unfinished psychological business of every person who came before you and never completed the work. This is not burden, this is commission. Because when the chain breaks, when one person in the lineage chooses the total death of the scarcity identity and the total installation of the sovereign, the transmission changes. What gets passed forward is no longer the wound. It is the blueprint. It is the frequency of a person who looked at everything they inherited, everything that was installed without consent, and chose to demolish it and build something worthy of the name they carry. The Rockefellers understood this. The dynasties that persist across generations, not just in wealth, but in the quality of mind, the clarity of authority, the unbroken frequency of people who know who they were built by someone who chose to be the turning point. The one in the bloodline who decided that the legacy forward would be fundamentally different from the legacy backward. You are being asked to be that person, not for the applause, not for the external validation, for the simple sovereign reason that the work is yours to do and the time is now. The old identity was assembled by people who were doing their best inside their own limitations. It served a purpose. It kept you alive through environments that required accommodation. Honor it for that, and then bury it with the full authority of someone who knows that what is required now is not survival. What is required now is reign. Place your hand on your chest. Feel the weight of it. Not just your own ambition, but the accumulated potential of every person in your lineage who never had the language, the access, the permission to become this. They did not fail. They were not ready. They were the foundation you are standing on. Now build what they could not. The bloodline does not end with you. It transforms with you, not because the distance is great, because the vessel that could carry you back no longer exists. This is the operation most people refuse to perform. They want the new identity while keeping the old one on standby. They want the throne while maintaining the escape route back to the familiar smallness. They want transformation with a safety net, which is not transformation. It is renovation with better lighting. Burn the bridge, completely, irrevocably. This means something specific and practical. It means the decision is made at a level beneath motivation, beneath mood, beneath the daily fluctuation of confidence and doubt. Motivation is weather. The sovereign does not govern by weather. The sovereign governs by decree, a decision so deeply installed in the identity that external conditions become irrelevant to its execution. Rain or sun, fear or courage, evidence or absence of evidence. The decree stands regardless. The old self had a voice. It was reasonable. It was cautious. It cited statistics and historical precedents and the very real possibility of failure. It was the voice of the persona, the mask assembled for survival, doing its final desperate work of preservation. That voice is not wisdom. That voice is the last transmission of a dying frequency. Let it die. Do not argue with it. Do not negotiate. Do not try to convince it. Simply withdraw the attention. Withdraw the belief. Withdraw the life force that has been feeding it for years. The way you stop feeding a fire, not by fighting the flame but by removing the fuel. What remains when the old frequency dies is not emptiness. What remains is the original signal, ancient, sovereign, The frequency that was present before the world taught you to be small. Before the accommodations, before the persona, before the scarcity skeleton was installed in the architecture of your nervous system by people who were themselves operating from inherited limitation, that signal has been waiting. It does not require construction. It requires excavation, and the excavation tool is not a habit. It is a death, clean, total, without apology. The bridge is burning. Good. This is the moment of installation, not tomorrow, not after the next milestone, not when circumstances shift or fear subsides, or the evidence finally arrives to validate what you already know at the deepest level of your being. Now, in this breath, in this room. With the body you currently occupy and the life currently arranged around you, none of which needs to change before the identity does. The identity changes first, always, without exception. This is the law. Sit with that for one moment. Feel the full weight of it. The version of you that commands a room has not earned that command through accumulated achievement. It assumed that command first, in private, in silence, before any external confirmation existed, and the achievements followed the assumption the way tributaries follow the geography of a river. The river does not wait for the tributaries to form before deciding which direction to flow. Now, physically, straighten your spine. Not as an exercise, as a decree. Feel every vertebra stack into alignment, the body organizing itself around a new central signal. Place your hand on your chest. Feel the heartbeat there. That rhythm has been running through environments designed to diminish it, through years of accommodation and performance, and the slow erosion of smallness. It is still here. It never stopped. It was always the sovereign frequency, waiting beneath the noise of the persona for the moment of its recognition. This is that moment. Speak the new identity into the body before the mind has time to object. Not as affirmation, as decree. The difference is everything. Affirmation is a request, a hopeful statement, directed at a reality you do not yet trust. Decree is a command issued from the authority of a self that has already assumed the throne and is simply instructing the outer world to catch up. You are not becoming the architect. You are the architect. Present tense, unconditional, non-negotiable. The scarcity skeleton is not being healed, it is being decommissioned. The persona is not being refined, it is being buried. The old state is not being improved, it is being died to, completely, right now, in this moment of total sovereign assumption. The world will take time to rearrange itself around the new frequency. It always does. The external is always slower than the internal. Do not mistake the lag for failure. The lag is physics, not verdict. Carnegie did not see the empire the day he assumed the identity. He saw it only in the wordless certainty of a man who had already decided, and then watched as reality, with its characteristic slowness, caught up to the decree. Hold the frequency, not with effort, with authority. The architect does not grip the blueprint with white knuckles. The architect holds it with the calm, absolute certainty of someone who has already decided that the structure will be built, and is simply waiting, without anxiety, for the construction to complete itself. That is your posture now. Calm, sovereign, certain. Not because the evidence is there, because the decree has been issued. This is where most people stop. They receive the transmission. They feel the shift. They sit straighter. Breathe deeper, touch something real in the architecture of their own potential, and then they walk back into their lives and wait for the feeling to return before acting on what they now know. Do not be most people. The death is complete, or it is nothing. There is no partial burial. A body half buried is not transformation. It is a horror. The old identity clawing its way back through the soil of every comfortable retreat, every moment of choosing the familiar over the sovereign, every day that passes in the performance of change without the fact of it. The fact of it begins now, in the first decision made from the new identity rather than the old one, not the dramatic decision, the small one. The moment you stop shrinking in a conversation and hold your ground instead. The moment you act on the idea without waiting for permission. The moment you choose the response of a sovereign over the reflex of the accommodator. These are not small moments. These are the building blocks of the new frequency becoming permanent. The new identity calcifying from assumption into fact, from decree into demonstrated reality. The God of your own world does not mean arrogance. It does not mean the absence of humility or the inflation of ego. It means something far more precise and far more demanding: total, unconditional responsibility for the reality you are generating. No more crediting circumstance for your limitations. No more blaming the bloodline for the ceiling. No more waiting for the external world to grant permission for the internal world you have already chosen. The sovereign creates the weather. The sovereign does not complain about it. This is the identity you are leaving this video with. Not the seeker, not the renovator, not the person who reads about transformation and files the information away for a future self who will one day finally be ready. The architect, the sovereign. The one who has looked at the condemned structure of the old identity, the scarcity skeleton, the accommodating persona, the shadow of everything exiled and buried, and chosen, with full consciousness and full authority, to detonate it entirely. What rises from that detonation is not fragile. What is forged in total demolition does not require maintenance. It does not need daily affirmation to remember what it is. It simply is. The way iron is iron, the way a mountain does not remind itself each morning to remain standing. You are that. Not becoming, not working toward, not almost. Now, in this body, in this breath, in this room, straighten your spine one final time. Feel the crown. Not a physical object, a frequency, the specific quality of presence that belongs to a person who has completed the death of the old and fully assumed the new, who carries no apology for their own authority, who generates silence in a room not through aggression but through the unmistakable gravity of a self that knows exactly what it is. That is not a future version of you. That is you, right now, sovereign, forged, inevitable. The old self is buried. The architect has taken the throne.